All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling racial equity in the corporate world.
Yeah, going beyond the buzzwords.
Exactly, getting to the heart of what's really going on. And we've got this awesome blog post packed with data and real-world examples to help us unpack it all.
It's a topic that deserves a lot more attention, for sure.
Totally. And I think what's really cool is that the blog post starts by making a clear distinction between equality and equity.
Yeah, that's a big one. A lot of people mix those up.
For sure. So maybe you could break that down for us.
Well, you see, equality is treating everyone the same, like regardless of where they're coming from or their circumstances. But equity, that's different. Equity recognizes that not everyone starts at the same point.
Right, like a level playing field isn't always level, so to speak.
Exactly. So equity is more about leveling that playing field, giving everyone a fair shot.
And the research shows that's not just the right thing to do. It's good for business too, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much research showing that companies with diverse teams, they just perform better financially too.
Makes sense. Different perspectives, different experiences all coming together. Got to lead to more creativity, better solutions.
Exactly. But the blog post doesn't just stop at the ideal. It gets real about where companies are actually at.
Yeah, it pulls no punches.
Right. It cites some stats from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, McKinsey, and it's kind of eye-opening, the gap between where we want to be and where we are.
Totally. Like when it comes to Black and Hispanic workers, they're a huge part of the workforce. But
But when you look at leadership positions, not so much.
yeah, that stat about Fortune 500 CEOs really got to me. Only about 3% are Black, even though Black workers make up, what, like 12% of the workforce?
Yeah, something like that.
Hmm.
And it's not just the numbers themselves. It's what they say about, who holds the power, who gets the chances to move up.
Yeah, heavy stuff. But the blog post isn't all doom and gloom, right? It highlights some companies that seem to be doing things right.
Yeah, like Accenture, Starbucks, Microsoft. They're doing some interesting things.
For sure. And what I find interesting is they're all taking different approaches.
Right, like Accenture, they're focusing on diversity in hiring, but also mentorship.
Makes sense. It's not just about getting people in the door. You got to support them, help them grow.
Exactly. And then there's Starbucks. You remember that whole racial bias incident back in 2018?
Yeah, could miss that.
Well, they took it seriously. They really did. Implemented anti-bias training across the board.
Shows you mistakes happen, but it's how you respond that matters.
Totally. And then you've got Microsoft using those employee resource groups, the ERGs.
I was actually going to ask about those. Not everyone might be familiar with what they are.
So ERGs, they're basically groups of employees who share something, could
Yeah.
be their identity, their background, their interests.
So like a community within the company.
Exactly. And in Microsoft's case, they're using ERGs focused on racial and ethnic diversity to give those employees a voice, a platform to advocate for change within the company.
That's powerful. So all these companies trying different things, some working better than others. What makes the successful ones stand out, would you say?
I think what I'm seeing is it's not about just doing a one-time thing, checking a box. They're weaving racial equity into everything they do, from how they hire and promote to leadership development to mentorship programs.
Yeah, it's part of their DNA.
Yeah, it's holistic.
Yeah.
It touches the entire employee experience.
Makes you wonder, though, what about the companies that aren't there yet? What's holding them back?
That's a good question, and the blog post tackles it head on. No sugarcoating.
Hit me with it.
Well, one of the biggest things they highlight is unconscious bias, especially in hiring.
Yeah, that's insidious, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's not always intentional, but it's there. How you read a resume, how you conduct an interview, those biases can really impact who gets a chance and who doesn't.
Absolutely. And even when companies want to do the right thing, there's often a lack of real commitment from leadership. They talk the talk, but
But they don't walk the walk. Exactly. And even when there's effort, sometimes the training programs, they just don't cut it.
like they're more about checking boxes than actually changing anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how do companies actually make sure they're making progress? How do they move beyond good intentions?
Well, the blog post dives into this idea of measuring success, not just intent. And they get specific, talking about KPIs, key performance indicators.
Ooh, data. I love data.
Right. Instead of just hoping for the best, you got to track your progress, make sure you're actually moving in the right direction.
So what are some of those KPIs? What should companies be looking at?
Well, one of the big ones is employee demographics. But it's not just about a snapshot in time. It's about looking at the trends.
So are we seeing more people of color in leadership positions over time?
Exactly. Are we closing that gap between entry level and leadership? Those trends tell you a lot about whether what you're doing is actually working.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What else? What other KPIs should companies be tracking?
Another crucial one is promotion rates for diverse employees. Are they moving up at the same pace as everyone else, or are they hitting a ceiling somewhere?
Yeah, that reveals a lot about opportunities or lack thereof.
For sure. And then you got to look at retention rates. If you see a lot of diverse employees leaving quickly, that's a red flag. Tells you something about the work environment.
Right, like they don't feel supported or valued.
Exactly. And then there are employee engagement surveys. Those can give you a lot of valuable qualitative data. It's not just about the numbers, it's about asking the right questions, getting to the why behind the stats.
So understanding what it's actually like for those employees, not just looking at cold, hard data.
Exactly. And this is where technology can actually play a pretty interesting role, I think. We should talk more about that.
So technology and racial equity, huh? I'm super curious to hear how that all ties in.
Yeah, well, the blog post really highlights how technology can be a total game changer, especially when it comes to measuring progress and actually holding companies accountable for those promises they're making.
Okay, so like concretely, what are we talking about here?
Well, they mention workforce analytics software. Think of it like a magnifying glass on all your company's demographics, you know? It can really show you those disparities that might be hidden in hiring, promotions, even retention across different racial groups.
Got it. So it's not just collecting the data, it's like actually using tech to analyze it, find those patterns that we might miss otherwise.
Right. And it gets even more exciting when you think about AI.
Ooh, AI.
Yeah.
Always love some AI.
So imagine a platform powered by AI that scans through like thousands of applicant profiles and it flags any unintentional biases, in the language, the criteria.
Whoa, that's crazy. Like a second set of eyes, but specifically trained to catch that stuff we humans might miss.
Exactly, like a bias-busting AI. And think about those employee engagement surveys we were talking about.
Yeah.
AI can analyze that data too.
Oh, right. Find those hidden themes and trends that, a human analyst might not pick up on.
Right. It gives you a much deeper understanding of what your employees are going through, especially those from underrepresented groups. And then you can actually tailor your initiatives based on that.
So technology, it can gather the data, analyze it, even identify potential bias. Sounds like the perfect solution almost.
Yeah, well, not so fast.
Oh.
The blog post is careful to point out that tech isn't a magic bullet, We got to be smart about it.
Right, like those ethical considerations I made.
Exactly. Data privacy, algorithmic bias, those are real concerns. We can't just blindly trust these algorithms without thinking about the potential downsides.
Totally. It's a tool, right? Powerful tool, but we have to use it responsibly.
100%. At the end of the day, technology can help us measure, identify areas for improvement, but the real change, the lasting change, it comes from us, the humans.
The leadership, the culture, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And speaking of leadership, the blog post goes really deep on how important that is for driving change.
Yeah. What does good leadership look like in this context when we're talking about racial equity?
Well, it's about setting the tone, right? Being a role model for inclusive behavior and making it super clear that this stuff matters, that racial equity is a top priority for the whole organization.
And it's got to be more than just words.
Yeah.
Right? Like actually walking the walk.
100%. They talk about transparency a lot in the blog post.
Transparency, right. We touched on that earlier.
Yeah. So, for example, leaders need to be open about the company's diversity metrics. Share that data with everyone, not just keep it to themselves.
Makes sense. Builds trust, shows everyone they're serious about it.
Exactly. And then beyond talking about it, they got to actually walk the walk. Actively promoting diverse candidates, making sure resources are distributed fairly, creating opportunities for everyone to succeed.
So it's not just about making decisions. It's about creating a vision for a better, more equitable workplace.
Yes. And inspiring people, getting everyone on board with that vision.
That's when you get real lasting change, right? When everyone's working towards the same goal.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to building an inclusive culture, which the blog post talks about a lot.
Yeah, we touched on that earlier, but I'd love to hear more about what that actually looks like in practice.
So it's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued, respected, like they belong, right? Where differences are celebrated, not just tolerated. And that means open dialogue, giving people from underrepresented groups a platform to be heard, creating those opportunities for people to connect and learn from each other.
Like those ERGs, for example, they seem like a great way to build that sense of belonging.
Absolutely. ERGs can be really powerful for creating that safe space for people to connect, share their experiences, support each other, and they can also be a voice for change within the company, working with leadership to identify issues and come up with solutions.
So it's about using a bunch of different tools and strategies, not just relying on one thing,
Right, it's a multi-pronged approach. And it's got to be ongoing. The blog post talks about the need for constant assessment of the workplace culture.
like checking in, getting feedback, making sure things are moving in the right direction.
Exactly. It's about continuous improvement, always striving to do better, be more inclusive, more equitable.
And that's where the link between racial equity and employee engagement becomes really clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. When people feel like they belong, when they feel valued and respected for who they are, they're going to be more engaged, more productive, more likely to contribute their best ideas.
It's a win-win, really.
For sure. But it's important to remember this is a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn, more to do to create a truly equitable workplace.
And that brings us to the final part of our deep dive. We're going to get into some real-world examples of what companies are doing to advance racial equity and, most importantly, what you, our listeners, can do to make a difference. So we've talked a lot about the big picture, the challenges, the potential of technology, the role of leadership. But I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty, like what can companies actually do to move the needle on racial equity? What are some concrete actions they can take?
Well, the blog post lays out a pretty solid roadmap, and it really emphasizes taking a multifaceted approach.
Multifaceted. Okay, so not just one thing, not a quick fix.
Exactly. It's about tackling the problem systemically. You got to weave these principles into everything you do.
Got it. So where do we even begin?
Data. Data is a great place to start.
Data. All right. I'm with you.
Companies need to get serious about collecting and analyzing diversity metrics. And I'm talking about every level of the organization, from entry level all the way up to the C-suite.
It's like taking stock, right?
Mm.
Seeing where you're at. But it's got to be more than just a one-time snapshot, right?
You got it. It's about analyzing the trends over time, seeing if things are actually getting better, asking those tough questions.
Like, are we seeing more people of color in leadership positions? Are we actually retaining diverse talent?
Exactly. Those answers can really help you pinpoint where you need to focus your efforts. Maybe it's recruitment, maybe it's promotion practices, maybe it's building a more inclusive culture.
Right. Data can show you where the problems are so you can actually address them.
100%. But the blog post also makes it clear that data isn't the whole story.
Okay, so data is a starting point, but it's not enough on its own.
Right. The numbers can tell you a lot, and they don't give you the full picture. You got to go beyond the numbers and really listen to your employees, create a culture where everyone feels comfortable being themselves.
Yeah, a place where differences are celebrated, not just like tolerated. Sounds great, but how do you actually make that happen?
It's about creating space for honest conversations. The blog post talks about employee engagement surveys, but again, it's not just about collecting the data, it's about asking the right questions and actually hearing what people have to say.
Like, are people feeling heard? Are they seeing progress?
Exactly. You need to get that feedback, that lived experience to make sure you're on the right track, and then you actually have to act on it.
Right, because feedback without action, that's just frustrating.
Totally. So the blog post suggests, implementing training programs focused on unconscious bias, anti-racism. It's about educating everyone in the organization from the top down about how bias shows up, even in subtle ways.
So like raising awareness, making sure everyone's speaking the same language when it comes to these issues.
Exactly. Giving people the tools to recognize and challenge their own biases, and that's how you create a more inclusive environment for everyone.
All right, so we've got data, we've got building an inclusive culture, training programs. What else?
Well, the blog post also encourages companies to look beyond their own walls.
Okay, get out of the bubble a little bit.
Yeah. Collaborate with community stakeholders like advocacy groups, educational institutions. It's about building bridges, learning from others, and leveraging those external resources to support your diversity and inclusion goals.
It's like realizing this isn't just an internal thing, it's connected to the wider community. Love that.
It's about tapping into a whole network of expertise and support that can help you be more effective. And then finally, something we've touched on before, but it's worth repeating. Transparency.
Transparency, it keeps coming up. Why is that so important?
Because it shows you're serious. You're communicating your goals, both internally and externally. And you're regularly sharing updates on your progress. The good, the bad, the ugly. It all goes out there.
So actions speak louder than words, basically. You're walking the walk.
Exactly. Transparency builds trust. It shows you're truly committed to this work, and it helps create that sense of shared responsibility for advancing racial equity, which is so crucial if you want to create lasting change.
Mhm.
So yeah, this has been a great conversation.
It really has. We've covered so much ground. But I think what's really sticking with me is, this idea that achieving racial equity, it's not a destination, it's a journey.
It's an ongoing process for sure.
And it's not just about companies, it's about all of us,
Yep.
right? As individuals, as a society, we all have a role to play in building a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. Whether it's challenging our own biases, speaking up against injustice, advocating for policies that promote equity, every little bit counts.
And it's not always going to be easy. It's going to take time, effort, a lot of commitment.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
But if we all do our part, we can create a future where everyone has an equal opportunity to thrive. That's what I'm taking away from this conversation.
Me too.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've learned something, been inspired, and are ready to take action. Until next time.